I've been back from Israel for 3 weeks. Rolly and I traveled there with 48 other BJ members for a week to show solidarity, hug and meet with our friends and partners, and witness and learn. Certain stories and experiences from that time are imprinted on my soul. One of them was Rabbi Rani Yeager of Beit Tefillah Yisraeli and the Shalom Hartman Institute told us a story about his son. With humor and frustration, he described how his teenage son always forgets his keys and is a bit of a mess. And even while he loves him with all his heart, the kid drives him up a wall. One night, a month or two ago, Ronnie noticed that his son wasn't in his bed. It was late, and he knew he had gone out with his friends, but he wasn't back yet, and Ronnie was getting worried. Ronnie woke up his wife. She brushed it off and said he's probably out with friends, and she went back to sleep. But Ronnie still couldn't sleep, and eventually early in the morning, he opened the door to their apartment to find their son sitting on the stairs. Of course, Ronnie's blood began to boil. Once again, the kid had forgotten his keys. Ronnie was about to scream at him when his son looked up at him and said, "Abba, I couldn't knock on the door at 4 a.m. It would have been too traumatic for my sister." You see, Ronnie's eldest child is married, and her husband is in the reserves in Gaza. A knock on the door in the middle of the night could only mean one thing. Ronnie gave his son an enormous hug, and they each went back to sleep. We also had a session with Rachel Korazim in which she taught a bunch of new poems that had been written in the aftermath of October 7th. Here is one of them. It's called Homefront Commands, New Regulation for Small Talk by Lital Kaplan. Ma nishma butal, ובמקומה נשאל מה נשמת, מה נשבר, מה נשאר. What's up? Canceled. Instead, use what's shaken up, what's beaten up, what's blown up, what's going on, banned. Alternatives, what's breaking down, what's forever gone. Instead of the rude, how are you? We must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? And instead of the standard response forbidden by strict veto power, I'm fine, in fact, it is required to say, everything's cracked. And the truthful ones will answer, everything is shattered. Everything is shattered. Over and over again during our time in Israel, we heard that the feelings, assumptions, and things that people once counted on were no longer. Knocking on the door in the middle of the night after forgetting your keys. Simple, small talk. Thinking and saying Israel has the greatest army and the most advanced intelligence agency in the world. Feeling protected and secure, which goes for all Jews since the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. Israelis are very worried about this. And, of course, that the promise of tomorrow will come. Kohelet famously said, Ma shehaya hu sheyeh, u'ma shenaseh hu sheyaseh, ve'en kol chadash tachat hashamesh. That which has been is that which will always be, and that which has been done is that which shall be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. After our trip, and because of the dominant feeling writ large, it feels like Kohelet was wrong. What Israelis are experiencing is very new. I would include, by the way, Israeli Arabs or Palestinian Israelis in this too. They all feel unsettled, filled with despair and fear, and with no sense of what will come next. They are also feeling deeply betrayed. especially in the certain kibbutzim where Palestinian friends and workers who were understood to have shared information that was used against them on October 7th. But most of all, I think most of all, by the government. Israelis feel betrayed by the government. A sense of what is tamid, what is constant, what is ongoing, what is continual, reliable, and eternal has been lost. It is particularly striking, at least for me, that this week's parasha contains the word tamid over and over again, 6 times, more than any other parasha. You can check the concordance. And I just want to list the verses because you'll hear it in the rhythm. The opening verse, of course, of the parasha is Tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael vayikchu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor lahalot ner tamid. You shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps, tamid, regularly. Aaron shall carry the names of the sons of Israel on the breastpiece of the decision over his heart when he enters the sanctuary, for remembrance, lifnei Adonai tamid, before God at all times. Thus Aaron shall carry the instrument of decision for the Israelites over his heart, lifnei Adonai tamid, before God at all times. The headdress shall be on his forehead at all times, tamid, to win acceptance for them before God. V'zeh asher ta'aseh al mizbeach kvasim b'nei shana shnayim leyom tamid. Now this is what you shall offer up upon the altar, 2 yearling lambs each day, tamid, regularly. And you shall offer the other lamp at twilight, an offering by fire for a pleasing odor to God. Olat tamid l'dorotechem, a regular burnt offering throughout the generations. A sense of constancy, regularity, alwaysness is at the core of this week's parasha and of the function of the Mishkan and the role of the Kohanim, which takes up the majority of this week's parasha. Interestingly enough, we know the word tamid mostly because of the ner tamid, the eternal light that hangs above the ark in the sanctuary, and in every sanctuary around the world. But the truth is that there is really a debate about the meaning of the word tamid. Tamid we translate for the ner tamid as eternal light, but when you look at the text, it has different meanings in it. Rashi notes that the high priests don't continually light the lamp in general. It's only lit in the evening, and it goes through the morning. But doing something, Rashi says, on a daily basis is understood to be continual, tamid, even if it's just once a day. In another place in the Torah, the idea of the ner tamid in B'ha'alotcha, they say refers to the westernmost lights in the sanctuary that always need to be kept burning, and the Kohanim would have to light them perpetually, meaning whether it was once a day or more, because the constancy of the light was most important. On a more spiritual level, Chidushei Harim recognizes that even if the lamps are only lit once or twice a day, it is not the amount of times that count, but the kavanah that sustains. That is the tamid quality about it. The intention and the constancy of the connectivity to the command to light the ner tamid is what makes it perpetual. He likens it to the recitation of the Shema. The Talmud in Menachot says, even a person, if merely reads the Shema in the morning and the evening, one has fulfilled the verse, the obligation from Yehoshua, chapter 1, verse 8, this Torah scroll shall not budge from your lips. If a person recites the Shema or lights the lamp, he makes the analogy with such emotion that it carries with them through the day, it is considered to be tamid, always, just like if you recite the Shema in the morning and the evening, if it continues, if it carries with you, it is always, you fulfilled the verse, the obligation to not let it depart from your lips. The biblical scholar John Durham, in writing about the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice, says that it was offered in the morning, probably at the beginning of the day's activity, and in the evening, just before nightfall. Thus the day was opened and closed with gifts to God, from whom all gifts were believed to come. Thus the tamid, the alwaysness of the offering, was meant to remind us of God's constancy and the eternal source of our gifts. Parashat Tetzaveh emphasized the centrality of the always, the tamid in the Mishkan, the ritual, the discipline, the commitment, the regularity, all as vehicles for being in relationship with God as a community. Interestingly enough, the Maharal of Prague, in his ethical treatise, Netivot Olam, builds on a debate in the Talmud, which is, I think, a debate that we've discussed here for many years, which the question is essentially, what's the greatest verse in the Torah? What's the Klal Gadol BaTorah? What's the great principle in the Torah? Rabbi Akiva says, who knows what Rabbi Akiva says? Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But Ben Azai says, who knows the answer? It's a quiz. These are the generations, this is the book of the generations of Adam. On the day that God created Adam, God made Adam in the likeness of God, which ultimately means that everyone is sourced from the same person. No one is so different. We're all comes from the same human being. Ben Zoma retorts, and this is where Netivot Olam builds on the debate, that there is even a more comprehensive principle, which is the Shema. Listen, Israel, Adonai our God, Adonai is one. But the test culminates with Shimon ben Pazi's verse, which is from this week's parasha, the one that says, one sheep shall be offered in the morning and the second in the afternoon. It doesn't really seem to stand up in the same power as the others. But then, in Netivot Olam, which is a quote from Ein Yaakov, it says, Rabbi Ploni stood up and said, the law follows Ben Pazi. The law is from this week's parasha. The explanation of Ben Pazi's is more inclusive than any of the other verses because it emphasizes that a person should serve God tamid, with constancy, morning and evening. The rest is commentary. I love this teaching. For all the grand quotes contained in the Torah about love, and that we all come from the same human being, and the oneness of God, constancy, what is tamid, what we do with consistency and regularity, is the greatest principle of all. The constancy in the rituals of the Mishkan are, of course, different, and importantly different, from the kind of constancy that the Israelites experienced in Mitzrayim, in which was a purposeless, painful servitude of constancy to Paro. And the power of this parasha's constancy is in also many ways as a balm to the ongoing Israelites wandering the desert, which is filled with unpredictability and lack of a straight road ahead and knowing what's next. I am guessing that the unpredictability of living in the desert was tempered by the rituals of the Mishkan. The elaborate commandments of the sacrificial system anchored the people in what was most important: connection to God and accountability for their actions. In our time, we can see this feeling expressed, I think, by those who say Kaddish daily after a loved one dies. In a time when feeling unmoored, there is a place to connect, community to rely upon, a prayer to be offered, and something to count on when all is not the same. It became all the more clear on our trip that the massacre of October 7th shattered Israelis' perceived reality and exposed a deep fragility in its wake. Civil society mobilized inspiring ways to serve and respond. And we met with Achim L'Neshek, Brothers in Arms, and Bonot Alternativa, women builders of an alternative way, two organizations that morphed from being central to the pro-democracy movement to leaders in the response to meet the enormous needs of the country, from the very practical to emotional and spiritual. But another thing we heard several times was how tired people were. The adrenaline of responding with such force and constancy is running out. One poem that Rachel Corazin taught us begins with this opening line. The poem is called A Good Day. I want to manage all the emergency situation rooms to mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the mothers, all the children of all the single mothers, and just the moms. I want to turn myself into bulletproof vests for all the fighters. The poem concludes, on a good day, I manage sometimes to cry. The depth of the pain and the upheaval in some ways is being covered up by all the doing and the desire to do more. And no amount of doing can even begin to deal with the enormity of what has happened on October 7th, and the truth is of what lived well before October 7th. Rabbi Yaakov Loberbaum of Lisa, which is in now Poland, who lived from 1762 and through 1832, had, of course, no mishkan or sacrificial system, and of course he had prayer, but he gives this teaching based on the Parashat of the notion of the two lambs that were supposed to be offered tamid as constant daily sacrifices. He teaches that there are actually two constants in life, and he calls them two timidim, two tamid, two things that are tamid, in honor of those two lambs that we need before us at all times. One is the verse, Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I am ever mindful of God's presence, which is from Psalm 16. And the other verse is, V'chatati negdi tamid. My sin is before me continually, which is from Psalm 51. And you can hear that he chooses these because each verse contains the word tamid in them. This teaching recognizes that the purpose of our service in the world is to both remain ever connected to God in holy pursuits, while also holding constantly ourselves accountable for the ways we have strayed and the mistakes we have made, with the hope of doing tshuva, repentance, and transformation. The tragedy of October 7th decimated so many constants, what was tamid in Israeli life. When we met with thought leader and activist Hillel Ben Sasson, he said that prior to October 7th, there were three normative waves of thinking about the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first was the folks who believe in some kind of form of peaceful solution, whether that's a two-state solution, a confederation model, whatever, that was one. The second was the principle of managing the conflict, which has basically been the dominant mode for the last 20 years. And the third is ruling the Palestinians for eternity as second-class citizens or less. Those are the three options, he said. That was before October 7th. And then he said, post-October 7th, the second option of managing the conflict disappeared. He said that there is a choice that Israelis will need to be made between option 1 and option 3, between finding some kind of solution or deciding to be rulers forever. And we know what that looks like, and we know the words that are associated with that. There are two peoples deeply connected to this small piece of land, and no one is going away. We heard this over and over again. For the last 75 years, what has been tamid, what has been constant, has been predominantly fear, terror, war, and hatred. If there will ever be a new tamid, if there will ever be a new reality, it will emerge because both sides, or all sides, have decided to recognize that we are all made in God's image and to take responsibility for the transgressions of their own people. There's not been enough work on the transgressions part of this pendulum, of the chatati negdi tamid. What are the accumulation of sins that have allowed us to arrive at this moment? And I don't have any interest of making a list and deciding who owns more on this list of sins. There are plenty of sins to be had by all, and I actually, for a while in the Devar Torah, started to make my pendulum back and forth and decided it was not a winning battle, that it wasn't worth it. We all know that what arrived at this moment well precedes October 7th. And October 7th was a turning point. And the question is, the turning point to what? If we're going to hold these two verses before us, Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, which in this situation I would say is be mindful of God's presence, recognizing who are we, which is, as I can only speak for the Jewish people. I mean, I don't really speak for the Jewish people, but those are my people. What were we put on this earth for? What is the purpose of Zionism? What is the purpose of what it means to be a Jew? What's at the essence of what our service is in the world? And the Palestinian people have to ask that question too. What is this land for? What is its purpose? What is its holy purpose? And what is its promise? And the second verse, v'chatati negdi tamid. What have we done wrong? Because we have. There has been much wrong done. And we need to hold both of these before us. And there weren't many people, by the way, that we met that could hold both those verses. Omdim B'Yachad, I would say, was the one organization, and the Chamal Meshutaf, the joint command center in the Bedouin city of Rahat, which was serving all the people of the area to give supplies and support. We're the only people that really are working with that at the center. Most Israelis that we met had not a lot of space for anything but the tragedy and the sorrow, which is the reality, which may make it more incumbent upon us to hold more of how we lift up those kinds of questions. May there be a day that the eternal light of love and God's presence not only burns brightly over this Aron HaKodesh and all sanctuaries in the world, but is a day-to-day reality in Israel and Palestine, where all peoples can live under their vine and fig tree, and no one shall be afraid. The day may be far off, but we have to imagine that tamid that can be, or else we will be with the tamid that is now forever, which is not the story we want to be tamid. Shabbat Shalom.